On June 30th, 2014, Danette Webb was found dead in her home. There was no obvious signs of murder, but things just didn't seem right. Police have been very tight-lipped about this case, and now we're asking why. I'm Eric Carter-Londine.
And I'm Charlie Worrell.
And this is Crime Lines and Consequences.
I'm Charlie Worrell.
And this is Crime Lines and Consequences. So Charlie, I know that we have both covered this case. Thank you for providing me with the information for this case so that I could cover it on True Consequences this year. But I was curious to know how you found out about this case and what led you to it.
This case is a very interesting one for me because it appeared in an unexpected place. So let's go ahead and back up. I started my podcast Crime Lines covering a murdered Indigenous woman from Canada, my very first episode out the gate. After that, I covered a few here and there, and then in 2020, I decided to focus on those cases more. But to do that in a way where I was also being educated appropriately, I hired a researcher who's an Indigenous woman in the United States who was doing, at the time, a master's program that actually focused on this issue and violence within Native communities, especially violence against women. So obviously an incredible resource for me. She would also speak with families for me and help find cases. And so one time she was just compiling a bunch of cases that don't have a lot of coverage, which, as you know, covering MMIW cases, that's a lot of them have very little information out there. But those are the ones that need a little bit of a boost in the media more than the cases that have tons of information. So she had compiled a bunch of smaller cases, and this was one of them. And she made notes in the research she sent me that Danette Webb was listed on, at the time the website was called Justice for Native Women. It is now called Justice for Native People. And at this time, when she sent me this research, which would have been some point in 2020, she was listed on there. However, there was absolutely nothing we could find that backed that up. Nothing about where she was born, nothing in any of the reporting where people said she was Indigenous. And so it seemed it was possible this was misreported. Justice for Native People no longer lists her, as far as I know, in their database. So I think it was possibly because this did happen in Albuquerque, which New Mexico does have a large Native American population. She was not from Albuquerque, though. I think it's possible that this just got confused when someone was going through. Justice for Native People will also take submissions, and maybe someone submitted this not realizing that Danette was not Indigenous. But there's pretty much no reason why this all happened this way. And the only thing is that it got this case that I feel needs more coverage in front of me and in front of other people who are specifically looking for MMIW cases. And I felt, I'm not necessarily the most spiritual person in the world, but I felt like it all had happened, and that of all the cases Annie could pick, she chose it. And she even sent a note saying, I don't know that she's Indigenous, but I feel like we need to cover it anyway. And she sent it over to me. And because of the length, it fits better for an episode like I did this on my 12 Days of Crime Lines, where I do daily episodes in December. I always do somewhat shorter ones. But one of the reasons there's not a lot of information here is the Albuquerque police, which I do want to talk about a little bit more, but we should probably get into the case. Sure. All our small talk was about how I found the case.
Yeah, enough with the small talk, Charlie.
I know, I'm just taking it over. Though, speaking of small talk, we say enough with the small talk, but if you're interested in small talk, we have launched a Patreon account, and we're getting it up on Apple subscriptions, where you can get our episodes ad-free, and monthly you will get an episode that is small talk. It's Eric and I generally talking about a topic or life in general, and we'll release those monthly. Our first one will already be up, so go ahead, please go subscribe. I'll leave the links in the show notes.
Awesome. Yeah, we hope that you enjoy those like small peeks into who we are outside of the show. So, Charlie, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off, and then we'll bounce back and forth and talk about the case, because this case is definitely one that is baffling. It's definitely one that there's not a lot of information, like you said, out there. I was able to find some more information about who Danette was in my episode a little bit through some of the articles that were written about her. But it did seem like she had an incredible life, that she was described by all of her friends as somebody who was very adventurous, loved to go out, very social, hang out with her friends. She had a large network of people who cared about her, and she seemed to be beloved by everybody who was in her life, from what I could find.
One of the things that I think says a lot here is her ex-husband, where their story's really cute. She called into a radio station. He was the DJ, and she requested a song. That happens all the time. But somehow they kept talking and realized they had the same last name and just little things like that. And they started dating. And they eventually got married. And even though they were only married for a few years before they divorced, her ex, Steve, said that she was the most empathetic person he had ever met.
That would be a huge compliment if somebody said that about me.
If an ex said that about me, I would be shocked.
I would be shocked too. Honestly,
But thank you.
That's so, that struck me too when I read that. I was like, wow, that says a lot about who she was as a person and how much she cared for other people.
Her career really shows that, because she was very much a free spirit, but she was also very smart and could buckle down and get things done when she needed to. And so she did complete a master's program in psychology. And her work after that was working first with inmates who are among the most marginalized people in our society. And then when she moved to Albuquerque later on, she was working with developmentally disabled clients, as well as volunteering in her free time they provided meals and outreach to those who are unhoused in the Albuquerque area.
Yep. That's Noonday Ministries, and definitely a really good organization that helps a lot of unhoused individuals. It just shows, like you said, her heart and how much she cared, and she poured her life into helping other people. And that's such a beautiful legacy to leave behind.
One of the things that struck me also with this is that she put so much into helping people who were incarcerated, unhoused, those struggling with developmental disabilities and needing state assistance. But she hated bad news. She didn't like to watch the news. She didn't like reading the newspaper. She barely watched TV. She definitely wouldn't be watching Real Housewives with me. Like, she did not want any of that negativity. But it's interesting because it's not like she was like the world's perfect. She was trying to make it perfect. She was trying to make it better. She was working with people who needed help. But, she didn't like bringing in the negativity in other ways. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think it's really inspiring to think about that as a personality trait. Like, you're not the person that's going to sit there and consume all this terrible news and then complain about it. Or instead, you're going to ignore that and go out there and actually do something that makes a difference. And I think that's something that is missing from our society in general. There's a lack of that desire to do something about the things that are not necessarily great with our society. I respect that and admire it so much.
Danette's friends obviously really admired this about her, but one of the things that they did also note is she didn't talk about herself a lot. She was very outwardly focused. And so it's been described like as being compartmentalized. She had her work life, she had her volunteer life, she had her friend life, she had her background back in Pennsylvania. She has all these compartments that people aren't really allowed into the other ones. But I don't know if it's necessarily that she was just super private or she just didn't talk about herself. She seemed like the type of person who didn't talk about herself. So it's possible people didn't ask because they didn't want to pry, and she didn't offer because she didn't think they'd want to know. My grandmother was very much like that, where my family comes to me to ask questions about my grandmother's life because I asked her, and she would say things like, "You don't want to know about that." I'm like, "Yes, I do." And she eventually told me, "I don't mind you being nosy. I wish I was nosier." So I wonder if to some degree, as we go through this, you'll see like sometimes it's like, oh, if someone had just been a little nosier with Danette, would we a peek into other aspects of her life?
Yeah.
because when someone is killed, you look at the people closest to them. And if she had these friends are over here, these coworkers over here, and these colleagues are over here, they don't know about everybody in her life.
Yeah, Danette did get remarried in 1996 to Susan Hagler. So she became romantically involved with another woman. They had been dating for a couple of years. At that time, it was not legal for same-sex partners to get married. So they had a commitment ceremony in a park. Nothing that could actually be registered with the government, but definitely was something I think that at that time meant a lot to LGBTQ couples. And just to have that moment with your loved one and to share your commitment with each other in front of those that you care about the most. It's crazy to think that was not an option not that long ago.
The number of my friends who have 2 sets of wedding photos, they have their like pre-legal commitment ceremony photos, and then they have their, all right, let's get married before the Supreme Court overturns this quick wedding. It cracks me up, especially when they put the wedding photos next to each other and they're like 20 years apart. It's just so cute. It's so cute.
It's
I love
really
it.
cute. And after 11 years of marriage and 13 together, they separated in 2007. But they became friends, which is seeming to be a pattern in Danette's life where she remains friends with her exes. She's clearly a better person than I am because I have not remained friends with any of my exes.
And after she and Suzanne separated, as far as anyone knows, there were no other romantic interests, or at least not any serious ones as far as anyone could tell. And she was very focused on her work, both her job and her volunteer work. And she also had 2 dogs. She was very active. She went out a lot of outings like in nature. She really loved nature. Their commitment ceremony was in a park for a reason. So that's where she felt comfortable. She felt at peace. And she wouldn't be listening to our true crime podcast for sure. But we do hope that someone who knows something is listening and can give us some answers to what happened next. And this is where we're going to get into what we do know about a case that the police have not been talking much about.
Yeah, so like I said, before we get to the day of the 30th, so what we do know is that on the 27th of June, Danette left work to head home. She had already decided she was going to hang out with her friend Debbie for the weekend on Saturday, but they ended up canceling their plans. Debbie wasn't feeling like going out. Her back was hurting. She had a back injury. And so she continued to message Danette over the weekend, but Danette stopped responding. Debbie started to wonder if there was maybe something wrong. Maybe Danette was mad at her. She didn't know what was going on. It wasn't like Danette to not reply to her texts. So Danette still didn't respond to that text asking if she was mad. After no one heard from Danette all weekend, on Monday the 30th, Danette didn't show up for work, and so police were called. They were called out to do a welfare check at her home.
So as soon as they get there, they need probable cause to enter the house. So from the outside, they were able to get that probable cause because there was a screen that was removed from a window, and that window went into a bedroom. So it looked like there was possibly a break-in. So they went ahead and entered the house, and under that bedroom window is where they found 53-year-old Danette Webb's body. It's believed she had died over the weekend due to the state of the remains, which were showing signs of decomposition, which is just, I always hate talking about that. They do believe that she probably died based on that and her dropping off communication with friends, that it was very probably late on Friday night into early Saturday. It sounds like those overnight hours. And there was no obvious cause of death, no gunshot wounds, stabbing, nothing like that. They did find a substance. The only reason we even know this is a friend told a reporter about it. And to her, it looked like blood. The police did clarify later that it was actually decomp fluid, which I can't even imagine her friends having to go in that house and seeing that afterwards.
It must have been very shocking and disturbing, especially knowing how gentle and kind Danette was, to see her in that state, or to see her apartment or house in that state. It must have been awful. They weren't able to tell if there was a cause of death, but they did believe that it was a homicide because Danette was nude, bound at her hands and ankles with duct tape over her mouth. So obviously somebody had some ill intentions with Danette There was also signs of a struggle, particularly in the kitchen. A planter had been overturned. There was soil on the ground and a mirror had been turned around. So her house was generally tidy from what I understand. That did stick out to investigators.
And I had mentioned that she had 2 dogs. They were in the house and they were locked in a different room than her body was found in. Not something Danette likely would have done. So it's believed that, at least in my opinion, the person who was in there had locked them in there. And of course, they had been there all weekend. They had taken them to animal control, got them treated at the vet. They did recover completely. And thanks to Danette's friends really pushing, they were able to find adopters for the dogs pretty quickly. So they weren't in the shelter for too long. Thankfully, they were okay, which, knowing how much Danette loved her dogs, that's a relief, that at least they were okay.
And even though the police couldn't determine a cause of death, they were hopeful that the medical investigator or the medical examiner would be able to. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The autopsy did show signs of assault. Danette had some cuts and scrapes on her body along with 2 broken ribs, but none of those injuries would have caused her to die. So it is possible that she could have been strangled, but there were no obvious signs, at least to her neck, of any trauma. That can be obscured by some decomposition sometimes. Another possibility could have been asphyxiation, but there just wasn't enough evidence. And I would say maybe even there wasn't any evidence to show or determine that that was true.
And in this case, the ME decided that as they could not figure out the cause of death, they weren't going to rule on manner of death. So both the cause of death and manner of death is considered undetermined officially, but the Albuquerque police were investigating this as a homicide due to the totality of the circumstances. I mean, she was found bound and then gagged with duct tape. And maybe she had a heart attack while she was doing it, but it definitely indicates a third party was involved in whatever happened. And so they were investigating it as a homicide. In my personal opinion, I think it's unlikely it was an accident, natural, or suicide. Therefore, homicide is what we have left. On the whole, I think it looks like there was someone else involved.
I agree with you, Charlie. And I think it's frustrating hearing that the manner and cause of death are listed as undetermined, because I know how difficult that makes things when there's investigations that are trying to proceed and when decisions are being made about budgetary constraints. To have that homicide listed on there makes it a lot easier to continue that process. I'm not saying that the police have given up on it, but it does change the priorities, I think, when you look at a case where it is clearly defined. And like I said before, the investigators on this case have been very tight-lipped. They don't release very much information at all about it. And most of what we've been able to find and Charlie's been able to find has been what's been presented in the media, and also from first-hand accounts or second-hand accounts from Danette's friends and neighbors. So there was a neighbor named Evelyn who said that she didn't see or hear anything strange, but that if someone had been coming or going and creeping around, that her dogs would have alerted everybody in the neighborhood, as well as Danette's dogs probably would have started barking as well.
There was one night over that weekend. So leading up to the murder, she didn't hear anything. Right. There was one night she does remember having heard some kind of scream, some kind of noise. She mentioned it to her husband, and he also had heard something, but he thought it was just like a cat howling. And it's possible that is what they heard. She wasn't sure what night this was. It's hard to think back to what happened 2 nights ago. But the information we have, like Eric said, it's coming from her friends, and it's what they've heard from the police, told to the friends, then told to the media. So we do have a little bit of a telephone game to what we are hearing. So we are reporting the best we can from what we have available, which isn't necessarily the best. And it's unfortunate that the police are being tight-lipped, because I do think there are probably details that might help ring a bell for somebody, help push someone to come forward, or get this more in the media, which might help push someone to come forward. So we do have a few pieces that it's not clear how they fit, because they are just pieces reported through the telephone game a little bit. One of the things was that her furnace had been tampered with in some way, and it's not clear what that means, why it was messed with, what was even messed with, because it wasn't like gases were spilling out. But did someone attempt that? Did someone attempt it first? Was someone attempting to get the house caught on fire with an arson? Like, we have no idea because we're not exactly sure what it was. And that's because the friends don't know. They just have these pieces.
Yeah. Little specks of information.
Right. Like the money that was in the house.
Yeah. And $3,000 in a lockbox and completely untouched, hidden in the freezer. So it's possible that whoever was involved in this didn't go in the freezer, but still, her purse had cash in it. There was credit cards in her purse. None of that was touched. So it wasn't a robbery.
Right. And according to what the friends have told the media, they've been told that the police do have a male DNA profile that they believe belongs to Danette's killer. Now, the police, when asked by the media about this, would not confirm it and wouldn't say where the DNA, should it even exist, was found on her body. So that's very unclear as well. And other than that, like, we don't know about any other witnesses. We don't know any suspects, person of interest, any secret boyfriends or girlfriends she may have had, any clues, because they've released next to nothing about this case.
It's really sad. And I guess I could see why somebody might think that this was a missing and murdered Indigenous person case, because there is so little information out there. You know, I'm not saying that it isn't, because I don't know anything about Danette's family or any of that, but it's just really sad to know that there's so little out there and there's so little information that even one tiny detail could potentially spark something in somebody's mind that's listening to this. But we just don't have enough that I can think of. I mean, maybe there is somebody that knows something. And if you do, come forward, talk to the police, because Danette deserves, her family, her friends deserve answers, and she deserves justice if this was a murder.
Yeah, I know in 2015, the Albuquerque Journal wanted to run a big story on this case as it was coming up on the 1-year anniversary. And that anniversary coverage is so important for cold cases. And they asked the police, as they always do, for some kind of statement or any information. And the Albuquerque police asked the Journal to go ahead and hold the story because they would have a detective available for a full interview later on, because they were expecting some developments in the case in the very near future. So the paper, thinking, all right, more information is coming in like another week or two, decided to wait on the article. But then that, new developments, that new information, and that promised interview with a detective just never happened. So they ended up running the story anyway without any of that. And that was 2015. We don't know what they were working on. We don't know what developments might have been, but we also don't know why they decided to nix the interview with a detective where they could have just given the basics and said, we're investigating, and gave nothing else. But just knowing that the police were investigating it, that they were reaching out to the public, that they cared about this case getting covered would have gone a long way, because right now it's on Danette's friends in Albuquerque, who have done a great job, but it's on them to get with the media every year, get that anniversary coverage. They're great advocates, but it would be nice if the police were pushing for some coverage. I know from talking with families and working with them, I had a family who had an unsolved case, which has since been solved. However, they had Dateline interested. Now, Dateline on a hyper-local case could be a game changer. Dateline contacted the police. The police were not interested in sitting down and doing interviews, and Dateline nixed the story because they didn't have enough if they didn't have the police cooperating. And think about how many Dateline episodes you've seen. You either have the police, the attorneys, or both. It's unfortunate. That's what they need to make their show. And so when the police won't cooperate, and I think this case would be a great one for Dateline, 2020, any of those big platforms, and especially since any information the police give is exclusive because they've given it to no one else. Let's do it. We're 2023 now. Let's get going.
Yeah, I mean, what's it gonna hurt in the investigation to get some more ear? Even you don't have to give all of the details. Just give something that you think might be helpful, something that somebody may have remembered or could think about, just give something.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. I know I'm not a police officer, and I know I don't understand their job, but as a family member who's fighting for justice, like, I would want that for my loved one. And I think that you could be smart about it. You could be strategic about the information that you give out. You don't have to just not talk.
If the information they gave out was just reiterating what we've already gone over, that's giving news. They need to know how the media works. They want sound bites. Like, you and I don't work off sound bites. We'll interview families. They can tell us as much or as little. But there are people that will require the family to tell the whole story so that they have their original statements and their exclusive interview. You know what? That's the game. That's the game. And that's the game we're playing. And some of us opted not to play it, but we don't have the huge platforms. Right. Now, the people who do require all these sound bites and get you to cry on camera or whatever, they have the huge platforms. Let's get this going. 2021 is the last update that I have found on this. And the Albuquerque police told, let me get our source correct, it is KRQE News, that they had a lead, but they anticipated it would take several months before they would know if it panned out. And I'm going to assume it didn't. But one of Danette's friends, Debbie, who's been huge advocate in this case, pretty much like one of the main faces for this case, when she was asked about this 2021 statement that they were going to have a lead they were working on, she said she's been hearing that for 2 years. So she wasn't, I don't think she had her hopes up too high.
I can relate to that. I can relate to that feeling of, yeah, they said this, but that doesn't necessarily mean very much until something else happens. It's really frustrating. My heart goes out to the family and to the friends and all the people who love Danette. It's such a terrible way for her to go, and it's such a terrible thing that she isn't getting the coverage or the answers that she deserves, that every victim deserves. And I wish that more people would cover this case. Thank you for talking about this with me today. I think that this is a super important one. And I've been thinking about this since you brought the case to me, and just feeling really bad for Danette's friends and family.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle to get coverage and to get interest and to get information from the police for so many families. So when we highlight cases like this, I'm hoping what people are walking away with is just a little glimpse into what families and advocates go through.
It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. And that's something that I constantly have to remind myself. It's not progress in the way that I want it or in the time that I want it. But every little bit of progress is one step closer. And as long as we have people like you, people like me, people like others that are keeping these stories out there, there's hope. There's always hope. If you know anything, you can call 843-STOP, Crime Stoppers, 505-843-STOP, or you can call the Albuquerque Police Department with any tips that you might have. If you know something, just even if you think it's not important, it could be the difference between connecting somebody to the case that maybe can't be connected right now and not.
And Crime Stoppers does allow you to remain anonymous, and Crime Stoppers in New Mexico does have a website, crimestoppersnm.com. You can go there to leave your tip. We'll put all this information in the description, and that is for anyone who has actual information on this case. If you just have thoughts on this case, you can find us on social media. We're Crime Lines and Consequences pretty much everywhere, I think, everywhere we are. You can leave us messages there. We're trying to get good about posting our episodes when they come out, and hopefully we'll be able to have a thread started ready to talk about how much information do you think police departments should give out in cases like this? Do you think it changes as the years go by, as a cold case versus a current case? What kind of information should the police be giving? Should they be giving us names of suspects or not? Should they be giving us information on if there's DNA or not? There's probably a lot of nuance there. And what is the responsibility of these departments to keep cases in the media? Is that even their job? Let us know what you think on social media.
Yeah, be part of the conversation, and we'll see you next time.